can we move this? Maybe.
Hello, welcome to NETMOD in San Francisco, IETF 117. I'm Lou Berger. Kent Watson is next to me in person. Jason Stern, our secretary, is online remote. Thank you for being here in person or virtually. If you are in the room, we've been asked to remind you to scan in. It's important for the attendee list. And also, if we end up doing polls or anything like that, you can fully participate. There is a sort of surrogate blue sheet that is circulating. It has the QR code on it if you need it. Next. Jason? Thank you. We are the IETF. We have processes and rules that govern your contribution here. Basically, anything you say here becomes part of our permanent record. If you're familiar with the note well, great. If you're not, please visit the link at the bottom of this page. It's important to know what governs your intellectual property that you contribute to this group. Next. Similarly, we also have a code of conduct. Please be respectful of each other, treat each other professionally. Again, there's a BCP on it. You can find it at the IETF webpage. Next. I think we've been following this process for a while, so this should be pretty familiar to people, except of course if you're new. If you're here, make sure to scan in. You can do it by using the QR code I mentioned earlier that's on the left side of the room or the blue sheet. If you're remote, you made it here, that's awesome. Please do keep yourself muted and wait till you're called on before going unmuted. We are going to use, we're going to try to use the queue control that's integrated with the on-site app so that we have integrated queuing between those who are remote and those local. So that's another reason why it's important to scan in with the QR code. Next. Actually, got ahead of myself. Meet Echo queue controls right there. Another really important thing is we do collaborative note-taking. And if you're in on the app, there's a note button. If you're not, please visit this URL and help us take notes of the discussion. You don't have to capture everything that's on every slide. Someone asked me about it. They really like to do that. If you like to do that, great, but just don't feel obligated. The important thing is capturing the discussion and the conclusions from the discussion. Next. So we haven't updated our agenda from what was posted earlier. We have a pretty tight agenda, but we also have some good time for discussion on a very important topic. We've been discussing how to handle versioning. That discussion has been going on for a couple of years in the group. We've had a last call that's generated some great online discussion. We have an hour that we are going to try to use to do some good in-person discussion. We'd like to help move the conversation forward, and part of that is making sure that the group as a whole is aware of the issues and understands the trade-offs and is able to voice an opinion on that. We don't have everyone who participates in the group in the room, physically or virtually, so we're going to try to get the consensus of those who are participating now. As is always our process, any conclusions are going to be confirmed on the list. So that's a really important discussion, and then we have some good chartered and also some unchartered items. Next. This slide summarizes where the chartered documents are. A couple of things of note. is first, we have two documents that have been in the working group for a while, but not the longest one on this list, that have been post last call for a while, the interface extension and VLAN model. We had a little discussion last time on it. There has been an update. There has not been an update. I've talked to Scott Mansfield about it, who is the current editor, and he said that he didn't manage to get the update out for this meeting, but plans to do so soon after the meeting. So stay tuned for an update there, and hopefully we can close these out and put in the publication request. I'm going to actually jump to syslog. That one also has been one in the group. It's been discussed for a while. I believe there's one outstanding issue. Do you want to say anything about it?
Okay, so everyone may remember syslog was published, sort of. It went to the ERC editor. It was in misref status for some time. We brought it back to the working group because the examples and the tree diagrams that were in the draft were out of date because they import modules from the netconf working group, the client server suite of drafts, which are still in flight. And they continue to be changing just a little bit as those drafts are going through their final AD review and on to the ISG reviews. And so it will be necessary for, even though the authors have done a great job updating the draft and also improving the draft, thank you very much for that. But those tree diagram and the example modules will likely need to be updated again one last time as those client server drafts are themselves going through last call. I mean, when they're finally published. And
Mahesh, as author of that syslog draft, yes, just as you were talking about it, I'm planning to post the update for you guys to proceed with the draft.
Right, but that's great, thank you. But still, the client server suite drafts are in progress. They're going to change yet again, and so your draft will have to be updated one more time.
Okay, then I would rather not post it now and wait for an update from you.
Okay, thank you.
And the last draft I want to mention on this slide is the very last one on the slide, unknown bits. We've been talking at the last meeting. We talked about doing a adoption call. We did the IPR call, and then I think there was a disconnect as to what was going to happen next. The author thought we were going to do the adoption call. We thought they were going to do a rev. At this point, we'll have a brief offline discussion, and then move forward with adoption.
So speaking again, Mahesh, speaking on behalf of Jeff, that I just caught him in the hallway before coming into this meeting. He said he's sorry he missed the updates that or the asks that you provided, Ken, to him. He said he is more than happy to work on them, either in parallel or maybe still go with the adoption call, and he'll still make the updates that you requested.
Well, at this point, the window is open again to make the updates. So if you want to do that, it's fine. We won't actually issue the adoption call until after this week.
Okay.
So there's time for him to make that update. Thank you.
Yeah, if he can get the update out quickly, that would be best, because then we don't have to repeat the conversation about the changes. If it's going to be a while, let us know and we'll proceed. Next slide, please. Actually, you can say something. You were going. Okay. Next slide, please. So I think I basically talked to this slide when we had the agenda. We had a last call on 2 of the module versioning related drafts, really good discussion. We have there's different viewpoints out of there. We really want to make sure we reach consensus on this topic with an understanding that it might be a little rough. Per our process, we don't have to have unanimous agreement. We just have to judge what the rough consensus is of working group participants. So we are looking forward to the discussion today. We recognize that we may not have sufficient time, even with having an hour on the agenda, in which case we will look for online or perhaps less formal discussions or a mix of those. In any case, we really want to acknowledge the significant work that's been done by the author team. And we also appreciate the comments that are coming in from other working group participants. Next slide. We received one incoming liaison. Excuse me. It's an interesting liaison. Take a look at it. We don't have any request for action on it. It did go out to multiple other groups. If you would like to take action on it, you're welcome to send something to the list, but there is no specific action requested. You might find it interesting. I found parts of it personally disappointing because they're not using some of the work that I've done previously in this group, but it's interesting. Take a look. Dave?
Thanks, Lou. Yeah, so I've got a BBF liaison manager hat on. I read through the liaison. I did not partake in its crafting, but I would recommend that we send some at least acknowledgement back to the BBF. Well, we can decide what exactly that content needs to be on the list, but I would recommend at least something be sent back.
Are you willing to draft something and put it out on the list for comment?
Usually no, but in this particular case, I will.
All right. Thank you very much. We appreciate
Thanks.
it. You know, as everyone knows, we're contribution driven, so having people willing to make contributions is super important. Next slide, please. We continue to be we continue with our hybrid working approach. I think that the hybrid and not coming together in person has actually really slowed down our versioning effort. One of the participants commented that if we were all able to get in the room, that we really could have closed on a number of the discussions. I believe that. But that said, we have to continue working the way we can work. And so I do expect future meetings to be interims.
Yeah, actually, more importantly, it wasn't just this room, but the side meetings that occur while we're here together at the IETF week. That's when the conflicts get resolved most.
The real work happens.
Yeah,
Right?
the real
We all
work
know
happens.
that. If you think that if you're going to participate in an online meeting and you think the formality of a formal interim is too much and want something less formal, we can do that as well. And that's important feedback to give to us as chairs to coordinate the right type of meeting. The informal meeting doesn't mean it's not open to all. Our meetings are always open to all, at least the ones that we coordinate as chairs. But there's sometimes a perception that an informal meeting, you can have different conversations than you can have in a formal meeting. And we want to foster those conversations that can happen one-on-one that we're missing out on being in person here. I think that's my last slide, and we're ready to move on.
We are.
So next up, Joe, are you? I'm not sure. Is it you or Jason? No, that's on the agenda. Jason, are you expecting Joe to present, or are you presenting?
Yeah, no, Joe's presenting.
All right. Joe, have you seen the slides you're presenting? All right, this will be great. That's all for you.
I have actually seen them, but I didn't think I was presenting them, so I created some of them. But next slide, please. Hi, I'm Joe Clark. I'm presenting on behalf of the authors group. What we've been discussing lately on the call. What we've been discussing lately on the call is really centering around three key issues for versioning, with the intent being that if we focus working group discussion on one of the issues at a time, specifically, we're going to spend a lot of time on key issue 1, that we could come to what Lou was talking about that consensus. Not necessarily 100% agreement, but consensus. There is more in this deck that we won't talk about or we won't go through, but you have access to it that goes into more details about the solutions. But we're going to focus on these key issues. So next slide, please. All right, so we have a solution or versioning overview draft. We have a requirements draft that we didn't adopt as a working group, but it's there and it's now live again. So we resurrected it, and we have a overview draft of the solution that's been proposed in terms of overall module version handling or revision handling. Then we added this idea of a semantic version overlay, or what we're calling a revision label. We want to introduce tooling in order to determine the which version should be used. So there is a set of work to be done, and we're working on that actually, but tooling there, and then being able to choose what schema version or what schema overall schema you're going to use. And then finally, the work that kind of had a lot of initial effort behind it, but we've kind of sidebarred that for the time being, is this concept of a Yang package, where we can assemble a number of modules together to come up with kind of a, let's say, a solution level or a architecture level schema for a particular server. All of that goes together, but what we've really been focusing on and what's been proposed at last call is around the module versioning and the semantic, the module versioning or module revision handling and semantic versioning. Next slide, please. So here are our drafts currently. They're all there. Some amount of work, even if it's stub work, has been done in all of these areas. And like I said, really, we're going to focus on the first two there. Next slide, please. All right. So Jason does a very good job about sending minutes every Tuesday. Most Tuesdays, let's say. We meet via WebEx. It's, keep me honest here, 9 a.m. Eastern time, I believe. So we get together. It is open to all. We are not restricting who can come. We openly welcome a lot of participation. The people who generally attend, there's heavy representation from vendors. Some operators are now regulars that show up on these meetings. And as I mentioned, Jason sends the minutes back out for what we discuss. And of late, it's been around these key issues. We use GitHub, so everything is also not just the conversations and the minutes from these calls, but any issue we find, anything that's like, oh, we need to track this, or we need to come to a consensus or agreement on this, we put them in our GitHub repo. All of the latest revisions and branches of those revisions of the modules and the drafts, they're also in that GitHub repo you see there. And the name existed from back when we had a design team that was spun up on this, and we just kept the repo the same. Next slide, please. So we had a working group last call on module versioning and the Yang semantic versioning drafts, and then things kind of cooled. There wasn't a lot of discussion on it, and we had to go back and make some, we made some additional changes based on feedback we did get on the list, discussions we did have, and there was a second working group last call on this. Then that triggered back to some of these fundamental issues. And I want to hearken back to something Lou said. It's been years. This has been going on for years. And I'm not saying that to whine or complain. I'm saying that because we've had a lot of these discussions and they happened a long time ago, and we've slept since then. And we tend to forget sometimes where the discussion we had, why we came to something we did. We presented it at IETF117 maybe, but now we're having some of these discussions again. So getting that, kind of having all that out on the table would be very helpful to come to a recorded decision around some of this. That is why we've kind of distilled things down to these key fundamental issues. So once we get over that hill, so to speak, once we get through that and we have that may be rough, but we have that consensus. Then there's a lot of additional work that will fall out of this. Some of it, like I said, has been stubbed out, but we have the schema comparison. We have interested parties to work on schema comparison. We have interest in Yang, a lot of interest actually in Yang packages. And we want to be able to focus back on that. So that we've spun up a lot of interest. We spun up a lot of effort here. We want to be able to now say, okay, great. We've got the energy. We have people working on this. Let's make a decision. Let's move forward and let's use that effort in other places and get more work through. It's taken a lot of working group activity over these years. And we want to not complaining, just let's do it. Let's get something done and move forward. Next slide, please. Ooh, I've broken Jason. Good. Okay. Key issues from, the thing that we want to spend, I guess, the most time on is this key issue number 1. Do we allow an NBC, for those of you who haven't been, who are waiting for the movie, do we allow non-backwards compatible changes in Yang? Right now, RFC 7950 section 11 says that we do not. The changes that will cause operational disruption, we do not want to allow. The key issue we have here, and then our work is kind of fundamentally saying that we do want to allow for, or there's actually 3 options, but one of them is we do want to allow for this. So this is the fundamental question. This is option 1. So we came up with 3 options. There may be more. Others have already started proposing. I saw something from, I believe, Jürgen today on the list. Option number 1 is we update, the module versioning draft updates RFC 7950 to allow for non-backwards compatible changes. We do that. We say, yes, we're going to do that. That means that we allow for these, that we offer strong-ish guidance with a should not, that they should not be done because they are impacting of an active, or could be impacting of an active user base. And we add this non-backwards compatible rev, being the namespace, is a Yang extension. So it is applicable to Yang language version 1.1. So we add this. This is the option number 1, and there's a list of pros there. It does address the requirements that we already put forward. It does allow for gradual adoption. So one of the things, and I think it's maybe option 3, but not getting off this slide yet, one of the things we did talk about was if we say, no, we need a new version of Yang, just the getting people adopted, just the inertia that people have, the staying with or getting to a new version of Yang, even 1.0 to 1.1 has been a challenge for some implementers and some adopters or some consumers. So do we really want a new version of Yang to get this through? And so option 1 says, no, this will allow us for a more gradual, easier support by the industry as a whole. It also presents itself with other, not SDOs, but other organizations like OpenConfig, where they are using a semantic version like concept. Now and there's other things there, but you didn't come here to have me read you slides. We want to discuss things, but there are cons, being negative here. There is a perception that we're kind of cheating. We're saying, no, you know, it's the Wild West now. We're opening 7950 up. We can have all of these wild and crazy changes. And the other thing is, without a new version of Yang with this baked in, it's an extension, it can be ignored. It's not mandatory to be able to say that I will obey these rules and still be Yang 1.1 compliant. So those are the 2 major cons with respect to option 1. Before we move on to option 2, I don't see anyone in the queue yet, but I figure maybe I'll stop and.
Oh, that's a good idea.
See, Rob will. Jason Beecher, Rob. So Jason.
Jason Stern. Just one quick note. You mentioned that it's applicable to Yang 1.1, but I wanted to bring up that the intention is with these extensions, it's also applicable to Yang 1.0. So we don't.
Yes.
In the specs.
I didn't say 1.0 because we're talking 7950, which is Yang 1.1, but yes, you're right.
Is that listed, is the document updated as listing, I'm sorry, updating both?
It is not, I don't believe.
Yeah, because
do
I
not
didn't
believe
catch
it
the
does.
1.0 before.
Yes, that's perhaps an oversight.
Okay.
So Rob Wilton, Cisco, with a like contributor hat on rather than AD hat. So I've just had a quick look at Jürgen's draft. I hadn't realized he'd posted it. I think Jürgen's draft fits into this category of something that needs to update RFC 7950 and changes the rules to allow NBC changes. It finds a Yang 1.2 in terms of what he's saying, but I see that as a variant of this option 1.
I agree. I did read a little of Jürgen's draft, the text of it. I think there were 3 things there. One is a import by min version, not yet defined a max version, a notation, a since notation on a node level, like this node was introduced since then, and an update to 7950 to soften some of the language.
Kent is a contributor, right? So it did update 7950, but it at the same time declared that the result would be known as Yang 1.2. And I'm wondering if that declaration of it being 1.2 would trigger the same concerns that you mentioned earlier, the adoption.
So Kent is saying he's right. The title of the draft does mention Yang 1.2. Now he reminded me. So I think, Jason, you're back in the queue. My personal take is it would, because it could have the potential of, 2 things. One, maybe opening the conversation up to, oh, wait, but what about this? And what about that? And can we get this into 1.2? Because it is such a hard thing. We've seen, speaking as a representative of a vendor, Cisco, we've seen a long road to get new versions of Yang adopted. From 1.0 to 1.1, would it take much longer to get this adopted? And if it does, would people naturally want to include other things in it, knowing that you have that hurdle to get over and wanting to get some of the maybe other Yang next stuff forward? That would be my take. It would add, I think, more weight in a bad way on this. But Jason, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that Jürgen's draft did say it was Yang 1.2. We haven't, I mean, we're kind of jumping onto Jürgen's document before we finished showing all the options here. But
sure.
I mean, option 2, which we're about to talk about, is very similar to option 1. It's still, you should not make changes, etc. But one of the key differences with option 2 is that it requires a new version of Yang. So I'm not sure I'm totally in line with Rob thinking that Jürgen's document aligns to option 1. Maybe some parts of it, but there's a lot of overlap between 1 and 2. And one of the fundamental differences is whether it's applicable to Yang 1.0.1 or needs a new Yang version. So,
yeah. So we're referencing a document that was published this morning, just to be clear. And I read it to say it is option 2, not option 1.
Okay. Yeah,
there were a few elements that do come into the conversation. So it's good to mention, one of them is he's proposing doing a very minor change, but changing to 1.2. He also doesn't like SEMFR, but that's a different discussion.
Yeah, that's a different discussion. Well, we may. So Jason's, you're still the only one in the queue. Okay, option 2, please. Next slide. I guess that's where the queue is. Okay. Man, so I have progressive lenses up here, and the way that screen is, it's blurry unless I do this, which takes me out of the mic. It's kind of small, but I'll do my best. So option 2, as Jason mentioned, is very similar to option 1 in the sense that we, instead of update RFC 7950, we BIS it and we create a Yang, let's say 1.2, some other version. What version that is not known. But what that content is, and this is where, as Lou was saying, it's very similar to what Jürgen wrote. It's module versioning plus Yang SIMVer. Then there's plus a very limited Yang next items. And we say that because what I said, we likely would get people going, but what about this and what about that? And it could has a potential tendency to blossom. And then we would try to do this in more of a formal Yang language and formal Yang semantics definition versus some of the extension work. So the pros of this is it addresses the requirement, it meets the requirements that we put forward, and we can do this with those mandatory Yang keywords. So we can make versioning, we can make the import min revision, some of the import stuff we've done, we can make those first-class Yang citizens, and people can make use of them, and clients claiming conformance to this would have to support those capabilities. But as I mentioned before, this can be difficult to roll out to the industry, as we've seen. I'm going off of historics, as we've seen historically with other versions of Yang. People would have to upgrade all of their tooling to support this. Both the vendors would have to start, or the server producers would have to start producing these 1.2 modules with these new semantics, and the tooling would also have to be updated in order to consume them. So that could cause a challenge. It would also, we think, add more time to this to get it ratified, because now we're saying we're going to BIS 7950. There are other things we might want to get in it. So it's going to delay that work, which delays other work that I mentioned, like the packages, schema comparison, so on and so forth. And this has already been a rather large effort cost on the working group. Would this be a realistic thing to finish? We've already had some interest. I see Balash in the audience. We've already had some interest from other SDOs in some of this work. What would they do if we continued to push this out? So that's option 2. I'm going to stop or pause there for comments relative to option 2. Jason.
Jason Stern. One thing that I think is important to highlight is that second bullet of the cons. So, speaking as a vendor, I'd be very hesitant to go and, I want to add the value to our customers of indicating when we do a non-backwards compatible change. It happens, it's an exception, but it does happen. I want to start letting my customers know that. So that they aren't making incorrect assumptions about what's compatible, what isn't. But I can't go and publish Yang 1.2 modules today. I'd break all their tool chains immediately. So Pyang breaks if you say Yang 1.2. The new language keywords would break. So it's not insurmountable, but when as a vendor or producer of Yang modules, can you assume that a good majority of your users have upgraded their tool chains with the new interpretation of Yang 1.2? I think that would take a long time. With option 1, I can start publishing modules today with the new value added information with the, hey, heads up, there's a non-backwards compatible change here. All the tools will automatically ignore that if they don't understand it. So I can start adding this value immediately without waiting for tool chains to have to update. It doesn't have to be a big bang where tool chains and modules all have to be done, before this can actually be useful in the industry.
Thanks, Jason. Balash.
Balash Angel, speaking on behalf also of 3GPP SA5, but also partly about Oran, who sent the license statement. We have been waiting for quite some time, and it's getting problematic, and there will be pressure to develop our own solution if we don't get something accepted here. Also, both of these groups release new versions of their modules every 3 months about. So versioning is very important. So going back to Jürgen's draft, just accepting NBC changes without versioning would also be problematic. So we are in strong support of version 1, and the delay itself is a problem, even if option 2 is a good technical solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Balash. I don't see anyone else in the queue. So option 3, please.
Next slide, Jason.
Thanks. Option 3 is very short. Option 3 states strict adherence to current RFC 7950 rules. I see Rob eyeballing me on top of his glasses because I was going to channel him for a second here, but he can do a much better Rob Wilton impression than I can. One of the things he said as AD is that if this happens and we kind of just, yeah, it says must not, but we're going to do these one-off exceptions, it becomes very hard as an AD to approve these documents because they're flying in the face of a standards published, a standards track published RFC. The pro, however, is these are very clear rules that nope, you have to be backwards compatible. This is how it is. This is what was standardized. You have to do it that way. The problem with that is, other than the fact that we've already seen cases where non-backwards compatible changes had to happen, we had to get them in, it wouldn't work. The module was broken. The other problem is we just know these are happening in other industries, in other parts of the standards industry and other open source industries or other open source communities. This is happening. This is not a problem we can ignore. So this particular solution kind of doesn't even meet the requirements. It's not there.
But I've learned it again from 3GPP, if I may interrupt. The philosophy there is to publish every 2-3 months and then correct it later. And that has worked for them for 15 years.
Okay.
So this is what they are doing with Yang as well.
Okay. And Rob, I see you're in queue.
So Rob Wilton with an AD hat on. So Benoit's actually already made the point that this is simply not an option. So as it stands at the moment, I and the ISG are sort of allowing non-backwards compatible changes to go through IETF Yang modules because, in my mind, there's an understanding that we're going to allow some level of NBC changes. And at the point that the working group decides that actually no, the existing RFC is exactly right and this is what we should have, I would lock it down and say, no, we can't do that. And I've checked with the IESG and they agree with my sort of assessment. I think they maybe think I shouldn't be allowing these already. And I know there was a case where I think Alvaro held on a discuss and the document was published for discuss. It's the first time that's happened for many, many years because of exactly this issue. So the option here is we get really strict and it's going to break Yang in the IETF. I think it kills it off. So I think for me, this would be a dreadful option to go down.
Jason.
Jason Stern. In some of the discussion, I've heard, the term, like pragmatic exceptions be as a term where I think there's some discussion around, well, let's keep the rules officially that you can't make NBC changes, but we'll allow pragmatic exceptions. I guess I see option 1 and 2 as that case. Option 1 and 2, the intention in there is not to make it the Wild West. The intention is to have language in the document. We talked about, should not make NBC changes, but to kind of have a, legally correct description. So we're not kind of, have one set of rules and say, oh, I'll just look to the side for this one and let it slip through, where we can, have published rules that match our actual behavior. And Jürgen's doc he published this morning actually maybe has some nice phrasing of how to say it that we might be able to use in some of our current documents. But the idea is to make sure we do reinforce that it's a should not, and there are impacts, but that the official rules are that sometimes the cost and risk is lower to make the NBC change, and in those exceptional cases, that's when you would choose to do it. And if you're going to do it, here's what you should do. You should indicate it with a marker so that the users and consumers of the modules know it's happened. And it should, I still advocate it needs to be allowed for Yang 1.0 and 1.1 modules, which are in wide deployment in the industry today.
Thank you. So on that, I won't speak for everyone who's been involved in this. I personally think option 1 is the way to go. I will admit, and even though it came in after the fact, some of what Jürgen had said in his draft, I liked it. It made sense, but the 1.2 thing I think is just going to add too much more delay to this. So I'd like more of an option 1 approach. But I see I've triggered Ahmed to say something.
Before you say anything, just a heads up to people, we're probably going to do a poll here. We haven't figured out exactly the phrasing, but we're going to do a poll. So be prepared, scan in, be ready.
A number of polls, actually.
So, Ahmed Al Hassani, I'm from Swisscom. I've been involved in some of these calls as well before. So, I think we should be doing option 1 and 2 together because option 1 will give us for something that is existing to move forward. But I see it as more of a hack than a clean solution, right? If we want Yang to evolve and want it to be to grow for the next 20, 30 years, we have to clean the language at some point, right? And we keep deferring and hack on top of it and hack on top of it until it will reach a point where it's unusable. So we should start thinking right from now, like how we can clean it such the language will evolve in a nice way that will stay usable in the future. That's what I add.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
What do you mean by 1 and 2 together? In particular, what do you mean by, what do you want to see under option 2?
Okay, so option 2, make it as a built-in feature of the language, right? And that means you have a bit more freedom to change things in the language to make it a bit easier and more ergonomic to use, right?
So if I interpret it correctly, what you're saying is you'd like to do option 1 because it fixes our today problem.
Exactly.
But you would like to start maybe even on something called Yang 2.0,
Yeah.
which is a general cleanup and and anything is open. You want
Exactly.
a full discussion.
Exactly. And that's going to take 5 years. It's okay.
That's fine.
Okay, so parallel type work.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I would say that's option 4, by the way. And I'm not opposed to it. There's
That's
certain
allowed.
things I really like about it, but it's not one of the 3 that we discussed.
Rob Wilson, I don't know what hat I'm wearing, but I think that the idea of, I like the working group to try and fix this issue, the version issue now, and get that done and out of the way. I'm quite supportive of it trying to do a future revision of Yang. I think that's a good thing to do, but I will note that the issue tracker for Yang 1.2 or 2.0 has 100 issues on there, so it's going to be just whittling those down to something smaller and then doing that work. It's not necessarily a small piece of work.
He said 5 years.
That's realistic.
Okay.
I can't see the queue. There are 2 in it, so I don't know if there's anyone.
The queue is now empty.
Oh, okay.
And chairs in queue too.
Thank you. Alash.
Just as a clarification, I can 3GPP, Oran, and Ericsson, myself, we can very well live with doing option 1 and 2. So option 4, just we need some option 1 soon.
I don't know what slide comes after the option. But Jason saved me. So
Sorry,
Okay.
and stop here for a moment.
I wanted to go to you guys to do the poll. Yeah.
Thank you.
But Jason first, and then.
Hey, Jason Stern. Just a little care around the term option 4. Just want to be conscious that Martin did post an option, what he called labeled an option 4 to the list. So I feel like maybe that one's taken. So
I think I classified it as he proposed basically option 2. So
no, Martin. Sorry. So
let's not bring his. Let's not.
There's Jürgen's. There's Jürgen's.
Yes,
Lou.
let's not bring up the Jürgen piece. I think it's a little too confusing right now.
Sorry, I'm not talking about the Jürgens. So Martin, about a week and a half ago, did a separate proposal.
Gotcha. But that has not been proposed. It has not been reviewed here.
Nope.
Today.
We haven't mentioned it yet today, no.
Okay, so as chair, Jason, can you go to the previous slide, please? The question I read was, do we allow NBC changes in Yang? And as I'm reading options 1, 2, and 3, my understanding is both 1 and 2 allow NBC changes in Yang, whereas option 3 says, no, we're not going to allow it. Okay, so that seems to be a question that, and then within the options 1 and 2, what I'm reading is that, do we change the version number? Do we stick with it being 1.1 or rev to 1.2? And then if we were to rev to 1.2, what I'm seeing is that there's the mechanics of how we might do that, being an actual update or a full-on biz. So is that a fair way of partitioning up those question space?
To me, it is, with maybe at the end, I know Jürgen's draft does mention an update, but we were thinking that the option 2 would be a BIS to 7950.
Okay.
That's what the
Okay.
author team had
Well,
discussed.
okay, we can leave out that last
Okay, yeah.
bit of decision tree that I mentioned, but would it be the other parts I mentioned? Was that a fair way of approaching it?
In my head, yes.
Okay, so then thinking
Sure,
this is the right one. Okay, so we're going to do a show of hands poll, which is to I'll just start it right now, but it's oh, there we go. Do we allow for NBC changes in Yang?
So if you say no, that means you're supporting option 3. And you've heard in the room what the discussion was related to option 3. So yes means 1 or 2 or 4.
And by no, we mean do not raise hand. You select that option. Okay, I think the results are clear. It's unanimous so far that it is the working group's consensus, unanimous consensus, that we will move to, and it'll be confirmed on the list, but we'll move to supporting NBC changes in Yang. And now I think we should move to the next poll. How do we start the next one? Oh, thank you.
So basically the next one is going to be on option 1, keep the same version number, or option 2, move to a new version. We're not talking about whether it's an update or a BIS. That's sort of in the noise. That's a process thing. But the fundamental decision of keep the same version or use a new one is the main points here between option 1 and 2.
Almost ready. Give me a second.
But that's what's coming.
Yep.
Jason, are you in queue intentionally, or are you just left over? Oh, thanks.
Okay, there we go. And again, no is do not raise hand.
Almost the same number as the last poll, missing one person at 35 on the last one.
Yep, there we go.
All right, awesome.
The results are quite split this time.
Yeah, it is interesting. You know, we pretty much have a 1/3 to 2/3 split, where I'd say about 2/3 are supporting keeping 101111 as the version, but there's also a good part of the group that is interested in the other approach, which is doing something simple, a simple 1.2. So it's good information, less conclusive. Jason?
Given that we still have some more time for this, I know we still have some more slides to go over, but we're not expecting to have to allocate a lot of the time for discussion of the other issues today. But I wonder if it might be useful for some of the folks who said no, if they're willing, or anybody to, you know, express why they're feeling that we would have to flip to 1.2 and maybe address what they think about the fact that you know, authors couldn't really do that for several years until tool chains are changed and distributed amongst operators. Just
So
to
if
hear,
anyone is interested in talking about
that's not
why
as
they
big of an
supported
issue as
1.2, go ahead, Jason.
yeah, yeah.
So if anyone is interested in talking about why they supported 1.2, that would be useful.
Yeah, just
to
to
the
get a
group.
different perspective would be, you know,
So that would
useful to
be,
hear.
if you don't mind flipping the slide to option 2. And Rob, you were in queue and then you dropped.
I was in queue to point out exactly what Jason said. So, so effectively, a third of the people voting here said that they want this option. They want option 2. They want something that will, in fact, we change the version number of Yang, which will impact all clients, that force all those clients to move. So, it'd be good to understand what's the driving force for that.
And I'm curious if it was something like what Ahmed said, which was, is it both? And people voted for option 2 because they wanted a Yang 1.2, or if I'm confusing things more, I know right now.
I think you're confusing it. I mean, if you, I'll look to people who heard it, but I think it was pretty clear that the second question on option 2 was a narrow change, not a wide change. I don't think people were confused on that, but you know, maybe I'm wrong.
Balázs Lengyel, I don't know if it's possible to ask, but I would be very interested to understand that people who voted for 1.2, would they be happy, or would they accept that we do the 1.1 now and then continue to do the 1.2 later, or next step?
So before confusing it farther, we have a few people in queue. So let's run that a little bit. Kent, you're up as I think as participant.
Yes, Kent is a contributor and a 1.2 supporter. The reason I selected was because one, the rules are what's written, it's a must not, and I think that's important to stick with. And more importantly, I worry about clients and how they'll react to NBC changes that are occurring essentially when they weren't ready for them.
But they're seeing them today.
Point.
That's been our point of back and forth. At some point, we're going to have to make a decision, and I'm good. We are a group of consensus, but that's the key crux right there. They're already happening today.
And just to back up Joe's point, I mean, OpenConfig they'll make breaking changes, and they're quite widely deployed. The vendors, Cisco, we don't want to make breaking changes, but we do to fix issues, so that happens. IETF are making breaking changes. So as far as I know, the whole industry is not following the 1.1 rules. Or maybe a small subset is, but everyone else is doing. Even the draft is up for AD review. In NetMod, that's got breaking changes in it because they're changing the
The
types.
set date, yeah.
My hand is still raised, so I'll respond. A little bit to Balazs's point, I think. So I'm very willing to go with group consensus on this. I just wanted to, articulate why.
Yeah.
Okay. But I'm sorry, but to Balazs's point, if we were to do it with a 1.1, it does not make sense to me that we would then also do a 1.2 to clean it up. We should just go with what we chose. I mean, if we were to do a 1.2, I'd view that in the context of a Yang next, a much larger scope type update.
Oscar, you're next.
Hi. As an operator having a lot of Yang deployed, first, we don't always want, I mean, we don't want to have breaking changes, but reality is that they are, okay? And we live with, in the software, especially in the software world, with having breaking changes, updating, and having to update software every 2-3 months, and if things need to be broken, break them. Okay, so the sooner you make the decision, the better. Don't postpone it. Whatever you do it do it now. Okay, so and if you believe that Yang 1.2 improves what we have, do it. Okay, but do it now. Okay, don't wait don't wait 2 years. Okay, so do it now. I also contribute to OpenConfig, and there they decided to have breaking changes. Okay, because we needed them. We said, our operator, I need to do this use case, and if this use case cannot be done with what you have, okay, it needs to break, and if not, I won't use that standard. Okay, so here, if you believe 1.2, I have not entered into the details of 1.2, but if you, the experts, believe that 1.2 fixes things, do it.
I think you've echoed a lot of our sentiment on those calls. Do it now. Yeah. Dan.
Yeah, Dan Bogdan. So I'm in full support to do it now. The sooner you rip off, the Band-Aid, the less painful it will be. The only reason why I like adding it at 1.2 is just signals this is a non-backwards compatible, everything with this is non-backwards compatible. From the, acting as a software engineering leader, you're just determining this is like a new software release that has some major changing impacting. And you're saying like, okay, try to keep the 1.1 as much as backward compatible. 1.2 is non-backward compatible.
In Simver, that would be 2.0, but I get what you're saying.
So we have Jason, Charles, and Rob in queue, and then I think we're going to do another poll. So Jason.
Okay, Jason Stern here. I just wanted to thank Kent and Dan for being willing to come up and face the rest of us down on this. That's good. Good to have the discussion. I mean, one thing to realize is because it's already happening, the reality is clients are already getting fooled. So they're making an assumption that things aren't changing, but they are. And because they don't know when it is changing, we have nothing marking it. You kind of have to always wonder with any change of a revision, oh, there might actually be a change. You just have no idea. And so it actually causes you to have to carefully look at any revision bump of your module, because any one could contain an NBC change. At least if we go ahead with this, and once it starts getting adopted, there'll be, at least we can mark when it's happening, when it isn't, and tool chains will actually know.
Charles Eckel. Yes, I mean, I was struggling with this one a little bit because my kind of assumption was first I was trying to figure out what we were trying to accomplish with changing the version number. And I figured, well, what we're trying to accomplish is we're making some updates to Yang. So we should change it to 1.2. The thought is if we change to 1.2, clients will continue working and kind of assume that they can ignore stuff they don't understand. That was my thinking. If we really thought like moving to 2.0, I would think would break clients if they didn't understand 2.0. So, but it sounds like people are saying moving to 1.2 is going to break clients that only understand 1.1. And if that's the case, then I think that to me seems like a bug in those clients. But if we want to avoid that, then I think, yeah, we need to stick with 1.1 and wait until 2.0 is ready. If that's the state of the deployments, then I think we just, I'd rather wait and make all the changes and then go to 2.0. But if we think the deployments can handle it, I would move to 1.2 when you make the changes to Yang. It seems like the right thing to do. So that's why I was kind of confused, and I was hoping to hear the arguments on both sides to help me understand the pros and cons a little bit better of changing the version number, because it seems like my assumptions weren't correct, that 1.2 would not be treated gracefully by clients. And that's what I'm confused as to whether that's true or not.
Well, there are keywords then that those clients wouldn't recognize.
So I think you just said a really key point for the group to consider is if we keep 1.1, what we're doing is updating the rules in a document. If we change 1.2 to 1.2, we're updating the rules in every Yang model. And so it's a question of where's the ripple effect worse? Or where's the, which one is a more acceptable ripple effect? That clients will be surprised that this text chain, this must not, is now a should not? Or will they be surprised when they see Yang version 1.2? And which one's harder for the clients to deal with? And that's a question. It's a little bit of a subjective question, but that's what the question is in front of the working group. Even though Balaj is saying, no, I got it wrong, but.
So Rob Wilton as contributor, I was just responding back to Dan's comment really, and if everyone was using Yang 1.1 correctly now today and wasn't making MVC changes, then I completely agree. Move Yang to Yang 1.2. That's the point you're allowed to make these breaking changes. But because everyone is using Yang 1.0 and 1.1 and making these breaking changes, I think it's better just to update 7950 to reflect reality than pretend it's it's being used in a different way than it actually is. One other point I want to make is I think also saying Yang 1.1 and 1.2 is sort of confusing semantic versioning into Yang's versioning scheme, and Yang, the language, doesn't use semantic versioning. So Yang 1.1 is not backwards compatible to Yang 1.0. It's sort of in spirit it might have been, but it's not.
Okay, Kent as a contributor, next in line. So you're right. Currently, non-backward compatible changes are being made, but I think what's at stake here, and this is a little bit to Lou's point, is if we were really just talking about making a document change versus a number change in a Yang module, and that was all we're talking about, then that's a very, very narrow scope. But I think what we're really saying is that immediately, if we were to accept option 1, we would then want to change the numbering scheme and the other aspects of this whole solution, which then grows the scope to much larger, and that's more than I think we can expect a legacy client to be able to understand, and that's where my concerns come in. Yeah, if we're just changing the must not to a should not, I don't have a concern with that at all. It's the larger scope of the implications that affect me.
We are correct. We are saying that we're updating the rules and we're adding extensions that clients can optionally choose to support and that humans can use. So to Jason, I think, Jason, you made the point, to signal that these changes have occurred. In the interim, while we're waiting for this Yang next, whatever version to happen.
Balázs Lengyel, as one of the someone who was there at the inception of Yang, I remember very similar debates about deviations. Something everyone hates, but practically it's there. We put deviations there. It's the same kind of debate about NVC changes. Why wait with it? It should have been there in 1.0, I think.
While Benoit's coming up, oh, thanks, you did it. It's going to just have the second option. People did.
Benoit Claes. So actually, I was trying to remember when we started to discuss this, and we wrote the first draft, Joe, with Richard Barn. It's 2017, 6 years ago. So in the past, I made multiple times the comment that the IETF should be moving faster. We are 6 years later, and we hear it do it now, right? It seemed that people across, in open config, they understood that there are non-backward compatible changes. It's a fact, right? So I'm wondering, are you going to wait again and postpone this until we've got 1.2 and the toolings and 2.0? Maybe just time to get it done. So I'm a strong supporter of option 1.
Ahmed Al-Hassani from Swisscom. I'm going to speak a bit about, from an operator point of view, about the tooling side of things. So generally speaking, I feel it's updating the pipelines is much easier than updating routers in general. So personally, I would prefer if things break and tell me they broke rather than silently breaking, because people now, if there is no backward compatible change, operators might change something without telling you, and then after we deploy it 2-3 weeks later, we find something that is not working as supposed to, which is a larger problem than it breaks when we do it on dev and tell us, hey, this not working anymore. So when we're doing like a pre-prod, we would see it, we'll stop, we fix our tooling, life is good. So we didn't have a project. We have less chance of having problem in prod, which is bigger. So for me, it's like tooling is probably easier to fix. The second aspect is if we go for 1.2 or 2 or whatever new version, it will take a bit more time, which gonna make probably a lot of people not so happy. But the other thing is it will take even longer time to adapt. We have a lot of devices that a lot of vendors, I don't think once we have a standard an RFC, they will next day we'll roll a new Yang modules. They will still wait until everyone is updated their tooling, because even, for example, if we as an operator update our tooling, 10 others did not, so the vendor will wait for them until they update. That's what I want to add.
Before you go, I could have interpreted one of your questions, one of your comments, as being strongly supportive of moving to 1.2. I don't think that that's what you said, because you had proposed something different earlier. Can you clarify whether you are speaking to support keeping the Yang version 1.1 and allowing the change, or moving to 1.2 or 2.x? Because I think what you said, it can be interpreted either way.
Yes, true. But I wanted to clarify here the amount of effort, right? That's why my comments were like in the orthogonal to 1.1 or 1.2. Okay. So personally, I'm proposing we do it now for 1.1. We learn from it because when we are in the calls, there is a lot of open issues that were very hard to decide on what's backward compatible change, what's not backward compatible change. There is, like, if you go to the weed of it, there is a lot of things that we are not sure about it. So let's get it now, so other people who are waiting for it can use it. We can learn from that experience, and then we can move later to 1.1 or 1.2 or 2 or whatever version we want to have.
Okay.
That clarify it?
Yep. I think so. That's helpful. And it's fitting that you're up, because I'm going to start the last poll we're going to have on this topic. And while the poll's going on, Rob can speak. The poll is actually whether to follow your option 4, which is to do option 1 now, but then as soon as we have some stability on the versioning, move to Yang next. So I'm going to start that, Rob, while you ask a question. And Rob is sitting down. I scared him away. Oh, well. Go to the mic, please.
These two things would not be linked together. They would be running in parallel.
They would be running in parallel, but some people, I think, are arguing and may feel that by opening the door on 2.0, it makes it a little bit more acceptable to violate that, change that must not to should not.
That to slow us down. Just saying.
They're not linked. They're not linked. They are not linked. We'll give it a moment to see if we reach the same approximate count. You have 2 minutes left if you want to make any final points while we're waiting for those last few comments.
I think the points have been made on what Dan was just saying. They're not, you said they're not linked. I raised my hand here. I would like to see some of these other features incorporated. I think packages might be a nice set of work that might fit nicely into a new version of Yang, perhaps. But to the other points that have been raised, to the sentiment that I've felt on these calls in this time that I've spent, I would like to see this progress, because this is a real problem to be solved. And postponing just is going to fracture Yang, or could fracture Yang even more, like what we saw with OC.
All right, thank you. I'm going to end the poll. I think that's your closing words on the topic. And
yeah, I didn't get to present the slides I created, but that's fine. Thank you for peppering me for an hour or so.
So there are some more details on the discussions that are open. Really encourage every participant to review the slides and start following up on the discussion that's already happening on the list.
So what's the next steps to actually get this to move forward quickly? I mean, are we going to have an interim on this to actually try? So I think we sort of closed one of our 3 key points, but the other ones I think would just be as contentious. I'm not entirely sure we close this one.
I think we need a discussion, perhaps with you in the room, with the three of us to talk about where we go based on what we heard today.
Okay.
And I do think an interim on the other topics are good, but I'm just talking about this one specific point.
Okay. Anytime.
Yeah, I think the other two are much less contentious. The other key issue 2 and 3, maybe 2 is more, but we need to get through this.
Okay, Charles is going to come up, and Jason, if you don't mind bringing up the next slide deck.
Yeah, Charles Eckel, just kind of, we just finished our 3GPP IETF coordination call, and one thing I'm wondering, I don't think we have any sort of active, real recent liaisons back and forth on this, but I'm wondering if this sounds like something that would be useful to share with the 3GPP community, let them know what we're planning, and have it within like the next week so that it'll be ready for the August meeting that's coming up in 3GPP.
Okay, thanks. Oscar? Thank you all, and look forward to continued discussion on the list. Oh.
Okay, so we managed to. I didn't think that we could manage to finish the other discussion on time. Good. So now we are gonna talk about.
Bring the microphone down.
Here? No. Okay.
Angle it down. Angle it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to present you the updates of the extensions of the access control list and models. You know that this model was already an RFC, and here what we are doing is to cover the different let's say, the different gaps that we have found when using the Young model in the real life. Okay, so we already presented this in some IETFs ago. The document was adopted. Can you go to the next slide? The document was adopted.
Next slide.
Yeah.
Jason, next slide, please.
Yeah. So the document was adopted, and we continued working in it. Right now, we have the GitHub where we are tracking all the issues. We have performed an editorial review, and for example, we have just fixed the JSON examples and that had some mistakes. And also one of the gaps that we had was that the user file is now also we included the Young code for that. And we were also covering some more use cases that people were using the access control list. So ICID filters, VLAN filters, and matching MPLS headers. Okay, so they were not included in the original version. We will go now into detail. Also, for matching the ICMP packets, you need to match the code. So here, what we also added or included here is an IANA maintained module, okay, with those codes. Okay, so we believe it's better to that this lives out and the working group and lives in IANA. They can add the codes whenever it's required. Here we still have some open issues, okay, that we need to solve. So one of them is also a very common functionality that today we are also using in Telefonica. For example, that is the matching the IPv6 extended headers. Okay, so this is very common functionality. Okay, so that's we need to work out and add it. Also, there are some actions, okay, that are used for in some implementations, and as we will see later, we need to decide whether we include them or not. Okay, so here, as I will talk later, I would like to request the help of the working group to decide some of them. Okay, so we have documented, for example, one is the redirect action. So based on a match, you redirect to an HTTP server or something, and there are also some actions that we will see later. So can you go to the next slide?
Jason?
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Okay. So first, just one of the gaps that we had identified is to be able to have an alias for commonly used, for example, ports, prefixes, protocols. So instead of just having to refer to match protocol 5 or match protocol 7, so here just you create your alias and just match ICMP match, whatever you like. Okay, so it's just to create that or match port HTTP or whatever. So that is quite handy and quite useful. And here just the definition of the alias and match the content. So it's quite simple one. So can you go to the next slide? So the other, this one and the next one comes from a set of EVPN use cases. And here this particular one was for the EVPN with PBB flavor. Okay, in the PBB flavor, you have the packets have like a double MAC, an iMAC facing the customer, and a backbone identifier facing the network. So here the requirement was the ability to be able to filter by this I component. Okay, so here you just show an example of how would we create a filter. So for example, just we can indicate the lower value of the ISID or the upper value of the ISID, and we allow accept or reject packets. So it covers one of the EVPN use cases. So can you go to the next slide? The other use case that we are covering also is and comes from EVPN. Okay, and there we can have or multiple VLANs inside. So here, what we can decide is if we allow to bridge those VLANs or to route those VLANs. Okay, so here, with the help of the access control list, we can perform that functionality that is required by the EVPN service. Okay, so here we can just say, or this range of VLANs that we want to allow its forwarding or not. Okay, so we can accept or reject. Okay, so this also covers a use case that is documented in there. So yes, you can go to the next slide. So the other use case is matching MPLS headers. Okay, so here is also a functionality that is used today. So you just match, instead of matching the IP address or the TCP field and so on, you match directly the MPLS headers. Okay, so here these are the different headers that are defined in the 3032 and 5462, the traffic class, the label value, and the TTL. So here we have worked out which are the possible matches that we have. Okay, and here as well, so I'm going to comment later. So we also would like to have specifically this part be reviewed by the MPLS working group. But we think it's better to have all the extensions condensed here rather than doing a separate document in MPLS just to cover a small part. Okay, so but this was also a common use function available in many implementations. So can you go to the next slide? And here we have some, this is one of our big open issues, and this is which actions among all of those that are present in the different implementations of access control list do we use. So the standard model, just when you match a packet, you just do the accept, reject, or drop. Okay, perfect. So but there are more things, okay, that are done upon matching a packet. So here, for example, one of them is just remarking a packet. Okay, so you match, it matches this criteria, you remark it, or you set a different priority. We believe these are too close to QoS, so we believe this might not be the right place to put them. So it's better that they are living in the QoS model. There are also other options that are available in many ACL implementations. For example, that when you match a packet, you assign it to a certain BRF. Okay, so this is also a very common functionality. You deliver it to, you change BRF or to the global routing table. Also, you can perform a log action. So whenever you do a match, you take out a log, or you update a variable, or you update a counter. Also, some other actions that we have found is when you match something, you raise an alarm, or you redirect it. But those, for example, we require some additional setup. For example, the redirect will mean redirected to an HTTP server. So we believe it's very application-specific function that should not be there. Even we have found implementations with that as part of the access control list. Even the raise an alarm, we would need to also to go into the details of which is the alarm that that needs to be raised and how. So also we believe it can be out. Okay. So can you go to the next slide so we can go to the open issue? So here we have all these. So our proposal is just to keep the assign and forwarding to a forwarding instance, the log action, and the update variable counter, and leave the rest out. So can you go to the next slide? So just the next step, we want the working group to review the latest version of the document, the changes, and that you can provide feedback on these open issues. And if you are also happy with the current approach that we are augmenting the modules, so not creating a beast, okay, so now not a new version of the model, and we want MPLS working group to review the MPLS header matches. And once we have agreed which are the actions to keep, update the draft. So here, open to questions.
Only 17 seconds, but there was an open question. Any comments?
Just a quick comment. Do you agree with trying to remark the packet, leave it to QoS, because that we do cover it in the QoS model? And for the INI ICMP types, is there an existing type module that can be updated?
Which one?
For the ICMP types, I'm wondering if there is an existing type file module that can be updated.
We didn't find any for the ICMP, so this is why we proposed to be here. But I am happy anywhere if it existed, it was much better to go and pick the values from somewhere else. But as it did not exist, we just put here.
Maybe I'm saying the exact types may not be there, but
unfortunately, we're out of time.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, my name is Qingwu, and I will give update about the node tag in Young Data Model. So, quick update. This draft has been around. Actually, this already completed the second working last call, and so we received quite a lot of comments from Andy and Adrian, especially from Adrian. So this really provide good input for the polish this document. So we received actually 3 open issue has been discussed on the list. So we summarize this will give update in a later slide. So the main change we made in this latest version, actually you can see actually like remove the identity ref type from the Young module and avoid duplication. I really try to align with the module tag design in UPSI 8819. And we also based on discussion with Andy, we add 1 key leaf which use unsigned integer value to identify each data node. So we clarify the column, the meaning, and how they can be used. And also we provide some guidance and clarification guidance on which node should be tagged and which node should not be tagged. Next. So for issue we discussed, we summarize actually we have 3 issues, and first issue is about tag node with specific metric. We actually the idea for this node tag is classify the data. So Andy actually think we maybe not necessary as a young author to tag node with specific metric, and we actually do provide the clarification. We provide the analysis for this tag node with specific metric. I think that the advantage is if you have classified based this specific metric, you can provide more visibility to the data. Actually, for example, you can represent some kind of statics with specific metric types such as counter or latency, and also in some cases in multi-vendor interoperability, multi-vendor use cases, this really help promote interoperability. For example, vendor A has a vendor A model and vendor B has a vendor B model. So you may have some leaf to represent the similar semantics, for example, the latency. So, but they choose a different name. So use this kind of node tag really promote this kind of interoperability. So that's the motivation to really introduce this. And but we also got a suggestion from Andy also, I see, and Loberger also gave us some suggestion on this. And maybe we also have a choice to just focus on, high level class and, contact the node with based on, high level category, for example, based on the FCA PS category. Also, you may classify based on whether the data is static data or dynamic data. So we have no strong opinion for this. Actually, if working group believe this option, we're happy to take it. And
so as chair, it seems like an opportunity for a show of hands. If I could rephrase, does it seem like the question is, should we move specific tags such as metrics to another document?
Yeah, maybe.
Do you want discuss? You have comments here. Do you want comments now or at the end?
I hope that at the end.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
I would discuss that.
Yeah, move to the next. The second issue is about whether we do have guidance for which node should be tagged or which node should not. Actually, I think this is based on Andy's comments. Actually, we do provide this kind of guidance. Actually, I also add additional guidance in the new section, in section 9.2. Actually, in addition, some guidance we put in the section 8 actually. So you can see actually the guidance we provided. For example, the node contain one or multiple node tags. Actually, not necessarily all the node should need to be tagged actually, and so all tag value described actually in section 9 can be inherited down to the containment hierarchy. So I think that's what we have actually. I'm happy to take more input if you think still there's some missing pieces. Yeah, next. So the next issue is based on the comments from Adrian, and we discussed the tag format actually. So the currently we actually use the column in the tag value actually. So the tag actually comprise the tag prefix plus tag value. We use the column as part of the tag prefix. So we set some rules based on the Adrian's suggestion, but there's some corner cases. Corner cases. Actually, columns can be used within the tag value. For example, we may introduce the enterprise number column in the tag value. Actually, this cases we already described in the draft. So here there's confusion here. So how to avoid the confusion between the tag value that doesn't use the prefix but the content colon and also a tag that has a prefix or and a value. So this actually we come up with the proposal, and we have two options. One is we can add a restriction, make a prefix mandatory only for the IETF tag type and a vendor tag type, but doesn't apply to the user tag type. So for user tag, actually we add further restriction for the tag value cannot must not start with the user column. And the second option is we can make a prefix mandatory for all three type options. That will completely remove this kind of confusion. So next. Yeah, I'm done. Actually, yeah, happy to take comments, questions.
Okay, I have one as parts of it are contributor, parts of it are chair, so it's a little hard to split, but can we go back to issue 1? Can you explain why you think it's a good idea to have a tag that is very specific and is basically the same as a leaf. The example in the model is jitter, loss, latency, which are elements in our models. Why would we want to have tags that are the same as those?
Yeah, I think we see this, jitter latency could be the, fine granularity kind of class. Actually, you may have, loss, this kind of leaf. Actually, they may have, represent different semantics, but we can, classify, whereas different leaf in some model in the same class actually. So based on this information, so I gave an example in some multi-vendor environment. So different vendor, they may have their private model. They may have similar leaf, but represent the similar semantics, but use a different leaf name. So we can use this really, make it consistent to easy to capture, the similar, the metric related leaf, and so we can, to give, based on this data to further, analytics.
So what I'm hearing you say, and just correct me if I'm wrong, is that we're not going to have interoperability in our module. So we want to have interoperability through IETF defined tags.
No, I just gave the second case actually. The first argument is you may use this kind of, tag based on metric specific to provide a, fine granularity, visibility, you can, so, but I think that's maybe, yeah, something we have, but we have no strong opinion whether this is really must you have.
I think we should talk about it more on list. My question came as, I would say, participant. My response is as chair. I'm not sure it makes sense for the IETF to standardize things that allow that are really catered to non-standard implementations. I'd almost ask our AD what they think about it, but we can talk about it on the list. Joe, you were in queue as the next person's coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah, Joe Clark, Cisco. On ask 3, I think option 2 is the most sane thing. Just put the prefix on everything. It just makes parsing a lot easier and more consistent. User shouldn't be separate. User colon. It's easy. Then I know if I see another colon, I know what that adds value.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. This is Chu Fang from Huawei. Next slide, please. Okay, so this presentation. So this presentation is about the system configuration. A brief recap is that this work was adopted in November last year, and it tries to describe the handling of the configuration data defined by the server itself, which we call the system configuration. And the key takeaway of the document is that we have defined a system configuration data store, which is read-only to clients, but the content may change dynamically depending on some factors like the software upgrades or hardware license is installed. And also, system is merged with running to become intended, and during which process the contents in running take precedence over system. This means that we do allow some parts of system configuration to be modifiable by the client, and either a client override a system provided leaf value or configure some additional nodes inside a system defined list entry could means to modify that system configuration. And also, 2 approaches are specified to ensure the reference constraints could be satisfied in running. A client can just explicitly declare the reference system nodes or just use the result system parameter to allow the server to automatically configure the reference system nodes in running. Next slide, please. Okay, since last IETF meeting, the document updates is the high-level updates is that we add the precise meaning of reference as discussed in the last IETF meeting. Maybe to most of us, the most common case would be a leaf reference be the reference of system configuration, but we think that there are other cases like the system configuration being present in the when must constraints or defined as a mandatory true nodes or used as an instance identifier type value, and also defined to satisfy the mean element constraints. This other case could also be treated as the reference. And also we try to better clarify the result system parameter. And we think that for a node auto-copied from system to running, it has no difference from the one explicitly configured by the client. So the node will not be removed automatically, even the reference to it are deleted by the client, or the configuration in system disappears. Here the general intention is to we do not want to surprise clients with unexpected changes, and to allow the client to have full control over running. And also we update the figure 2, which is defined in MDA about the architecture model of data stores. Currently we incorporate the system data store and other editorial improvements based on Jason's comments. Okay, so regarding the open issues, I think there is still one key issue that we have not really finished the discussion. So I just brought up it again, and hopefully we can seek some convergence here. And it's about the offline validation of running. So the question is, must system nodes always be copied into running? First, I would like to mention that let aside this document is already the case that the 7915 and 8342 both define that running must always be valid. So it means that the reference constraints must be satisfied. But also the 8342 also indicates that the intended is subject to validation after the configuration transformation to running. So does this already imply that running alone cannot be valid in MDA document? So regarding this draft, I think there are 3 options we might need to consider, and during each option, some potential impacts to the client are given. The first option is that we always require the reference system nodes to always be copied into running. And this part, the auto copy might be painful for the client, but only the parts that are required to make running be valid needs to be copied. So you don't need to copy the whole content of the system configuration, just for example, the key node being referenced. And there is a question related to that. It's about what if the configuration in system updates and there is a stale copy still in running. The current document states that any update of the system nodes will not automatically be synced up into running. But the question is, can we do better, or should we do better about this? And the second option, that we do not require reference system node to always be copied into running. And I think this might be fine for the system aware client because it can offline merge system into running, and as well as implement the transformation to running. So it might be okay, but may require some extra implementation complexity for the client. But the problem might arise after some NMDA client make an implicit reference, and an offline validation of running for the legacy clients will break unless all the reference nodes are copied into running, if they heavily rely on the offline validation of running. So I think this might be the only issue. And regarding the option 3 is that we choose option 1 now and we just flip to option 2 later. And during this, I think there might be a young next effort to bridge that gap. That means we require that running must be always valid now, but we remove that requirements in Yandex. But still, what's the impact on legacy clients? Is this a similar issue as the option 2? And how would this client know they can stop copying system nodes into running? So Rob, I see you in the queue. Yeah.
Just to be clear, if we have the discussion, you're probably not going to be able to present your next slide, and you'll want to take that to the list.
Sure,
If
sure.
that's- Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you for presenting this, because I think I agree this is also the key issue, I think, with the draft, is to work
Yeah.
out this thing and that in terms
Yes.
of going forward. So I wouldn't necessarily state it quite as must system nodes always be copied to running. I think the key question in my head is running on its own always expected to be valid, or is it okay for running to be implicitly valid by doing running plus system merges into intended, and you validate intended, and if intended validates, by implication running is valid, which I think is what Kent and I think is a nice way of doing it, and Jürgen maybe as well. So I've asked the chairs, I'm wondering if this is a good thing to ask a poll in the room on as to whether.
Working on it.
Okay. Whether, yeah, well, I'll let you sort that out.
So
then.
poll is coming, and while we're getting the wording quite right, well, Kent is getting the wording right. Jason, you're in queue.
Okay, yeah, Jason Stern. So I don't have a solution here, but I just wanted to bring up two parts to that. So one is a lot of tools today do a get config or check that the config they fetch from the router is valid. So that's definitely a problem out there. If we make running invalid or allow it to be invalid, it is going to impact a lot of tool chains. On the other hand, you know, if we don't allow running to be invalid, like if we or let me flip it around. If we ever try to standardize configuration groups or inactive config, we might have a solution for the system config, but for those two things, we may be kind of stuck if we don't allow running to be invalid. So I don't have a solution to it, I'm saying, but you know, we may have to also keep an eye to what we might do with config groups and inactive config if we ever intend to standardize those.
Thank you, Jason. I realized I didn't make a mistake in the question description. So thanks for Rob pointing out this.
So we have a poll going. If you can look at the question on your screen and answer it as you see fit.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay.
You can try. You can try.
Can you explain what's not clear?
I wasn't sure what they mean by offline running document versus the online running.
I see. Well, it's, so offline would be if the client were to ask for the server for the running configuration, it gets back a document, and it wants to validate that using its own cache of Yang modules. Is that something that we think must succeed? That's what I mean by offline validation.
Well, I guess I have a different way to think about it. Is that if you push configuration into running to the device and you do a get config, you should get back exactly what you put in. So if you put some valid and if it was accepted, so if you put in a configuration in, it has dependencies on the system and it resolves it's fine, and you do get config, get back what you put in. It's not then modified or changed. So it's just like different thought, but.
And I had a completely different interpretation.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe we should cancel.
So
it.
I think we need to cancel it and move on to the next presentation. So we're fair, and we'll need to take it to the list.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. 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 For this work is about the Yang extension and metadata notation for immutable flag. Next slide, please. And this is not a new work actually, but I still prepare a recap slide to make sure that anyone can understand the background. And the background is that the protocol operations can fail for various reasons. For example, when the server rejects the configuration when it internally considered it as immutable, and such configuration could be some hardware-related configuration or built-in keys or certificates or some server predefined rules or policies, related capabilities, etc. And immutability is already allowed today and implemented in multiple vendors. For example, maybe there must always be a user account called root and cannot be modified. And it's the aim of this document to define a single solution instead of the multiple existing vendor-specific solution. to formally flag which nodes are immutable, so that a client can benefit from this by knowing beforehand why certain nodes they consider otherwise valid, but will cause the server to return an error. But it's intended to be descriptive, and it's more like this documentation. And this document the existing server behavior doesn't apply to the server without any immutable configuration. So Blush, I see you in the queue. Okay. Next slide, please. So since the last IETF meeting, I think there are a lot of discussion regarding the transactional and non-transactional API. I think generally there is a desire to always allow a client to move from any valid configuration to another valid configuration in a single update. So I think there is working group consensus that we think only transactional APIs should be supported. So to avoid leading to any potential non-transactional cases, the current document just narrow the scope to only support the system configuration. That means that immutable configuration can only be created, updated, or deleted by the server. The client can not create the immutable configuration, and if it tries to modify some configuration, the server considered immutable, the server will always reject it. So the authors believe that this might avoid the non-transactional behaviors. And this is regardless, the immutable flag is regardless the implementation of the system configuration data store. So it's independent of that.
Balázs Lengyel speaking on behalf of 3GPP and ORAN. I am very sad to see that that IETF wants to reject at least half of the 3GPP liaison statement, which explicitly asks for the client being able to create immutable things, which would not violate transactional API, because if you remove the layer above and recreate it, you would be able to, in one step, get anywhere. I'm very sorry I was not active lately, but this is a problem for 3GPP.
Rob Wilson as a participant. So just to answer your question, or make a comment on yours one first, I think you could have potentially a different property that isn't necessarily immutable that says, if you were to modify this leaf, for example, that's been marked as impactful, then effectively it's going to cause a bigger change that means you delete the parent list or whatever container above it and have a bigger impact and still modify the configuration. So I think the one thing that I would like to avoid is not being able to go from one configuration to another. But in your case, it might be the same. If you were to modify this property that you think was immutable, actually the impact of that change is much larger. It's going to take down a service and recreate a new service with the other parameters. So for that aspect, I think that might be a solution to that one. Would that work? We can chat afterwards, or not after we can chat.
This is a very important point for 3GPP and ORAN, and yeah, let's chat. But this solution doesn't help with that yet.
And then my views on this is sort of the same that I've always had, is I can see both sides of this, that I can see the desire to make sure that clients can do what they want and have full control is always great. I can also see the bit where you see in the first slide, devices always been able to support immutable configuration, and that's nothing, we're not adding anything new here. I'm not sure that's quite true to how I read Yang or netconf. I know netconf says it can fail for any reason, but I think that's more to do with like out of memory or other system errors rather than what's within the Yang language. Having said that, I do understand the way that servers behave, and sort of documenting that makes sense. I mean, if that's how they're going to behave, that's also a useful thing. So I sort of conflicted on those two things. The one last point I want to make is that just being able to control running itself and keeping the immutable configuration in system doesn't guarantee you always have that transactional behavior that's supported, because I think it goes back to the previous talk we were having about how you do validation of running plus system equals intended, is if you're trying to modify running and you've got some immutable configuration in system, and actually what you end up validating is intended, the two together, you could still stop a change happening in running because of immutable config in system. Does that make sense? Did to me.
So we're gonna let the discussion continue, but we're gonna start a poll on this. There's been good discussion in the room. There's been good discussion on the list. And keep in mind, the poll is on a starting point, not the end point. So we're not asking for working group last call in this document. We're talking about adoption. So adoption is the start of the process, not the end of the process. So keep that in mind when you answer the poll. Jason was in queue, so Balazs, before you, Jason, please.
I guess I just wanted to echo a bit Rob's what Rob mentioned in his first point. I would definitely be a proponent that an immutable flag just means that the server may destroy and recreate one of the ancestors above that element, which is either like a list entry or a presence container, in order to recreate basically the object with the new value of the field you're trying to change. That's in line with being able to be declarative in a config and say, you know, this is the config I want to get to, server, make it happen however you need to make it happen.
Okay, so Kent is a contributor. First, I just want to mention, I think this work supports any transactional, transactional API. So if Balazs is claiming that 3GPP's approach is transactional, then this should be a way to express when certain nodes are immutable. A second thing to Rob's, and a concrete example, I think, which is in play here, not just out of memory, but for instance, many systems require a user account called root. You cannot possibly delete the root account. Any attempt to delete the root account would fail. So there's the root account would be a node that's kind of flagged as immutable.
Right. To be fair to the last speaker, we have to cut the list. I'm sorry, cut the line. Please send your comment to the list. Apologize for not being able to get to it. I'm going to end the poll. From the poll, we didn't have a lot of people responding, but those responding thought this was a suitable starting point for work for the working group. So thank you for the presentation and the work, and we'll confirm this on the list. Our last speaker.
Yeah, this is Qingwu again. I will present the last topic about the guideline for author review of the document contain young data models, and so the conversion 01. Actually, 3 motivation to write this document. For the young guideline original RFC actually doesn't cover the guideline for the INI maintain module. This caused a lot of confusion for module author. They when request when they continually ask the question, how do handle some of this INI maintain module, for example, they want to add a value or deprecate a value. They may have 2 choices. Either they can choose to define the INI maintain module, or they can introduce this new value or deprecate value in the existing module. So this causes this source of information in the registry actually not consistent. So really we want to fix this. Secondly is for security template, usually we actually assume they apply all the young data model, but that's not true. This kind of statement actually a little bit restricted. Actually, we for example, they didn't apply to the abstract data structure. And also we hear the discussion in last IETF meeting from Kathleen Murater as a trust. They raised the issue about they lack the code marker for security template. So these are 3 reasons why we really want to write this document next. So we make a lot of major changes, actually try to address this, motivation, the issue. Actually, first at the guideline for INI maintain modules. Second, we relax the rules for the statement for the security template. So this, for example, doesn't need to follow the security template is not required for module that follow the obviously 87, 89, and also we update the young security consideration template and add the statement that obviously that are listed in the security template are to be listed as a normative reference in the document. Next. And we also make a minor change. I don't want to repeat the detail. You can see that actually the most important change is add code marker for security template based on the trust experts suggestion. And we also make a minor change, integrate some errata we identified into this document. That's why we make this BIS document. And there's some other minor changes. Next. And you can see actually we update the URL IETF author guideline. We add a tool validation for two parts. One is a validation check for JSON encoding example. Second is to add a validation check to the ensure YAML module fit into the line limit of the individual draft. Next. So still we have one pending issue actually. Currently, security template, we actually relax the rules. This cannot apply to the abstract data structure. Also, maybe metadata annotation described in the RFC 79. 52 is another example, and we try to explore some other exception example. If you have input, please let us know. We'll try to fix this. Next. Yeah, so this is a summary. Actually, we try to address the IANA maintain young data model issue. Actually, this raised by the young model author, and also we think some of the requirements for the security template is too restricted. Try to fix this in a issue document, a BIS document. So we like working group to consider to adopt this worker. With the following scope. The first is IANA guideline. This is not a new draft, actually already be documented in the one individual draft has already been sufficiently discussed on the NetMod manifest. Also will integrate the errata and the trust issue. Comments?
So Rob Wilson, as a lady, I think that for the trust issue, as a starting point, just raising a errata against the existing RFC and to add in the extra tags would be a good first step because it's much quicker. So I think that's worth doing. And then the second aspect of this is Kent and I can't remember when we had an exchange, but Kent effectively said, you're doing the security templates all wrong. And he's effectively saying that we're writing far too much text in the security templates and you're documenting too many nodes. And hence Kent's draft is much more narrow in scope of what he describes as things that are impactful and worth documenting. And I think Kent's right. So effectively, I think if you actually look at the template, actually it sort of mostly supports what Kent says in some places or some of the text that sort of justifies that. So I think that I would like the security template to be updated to be more accurately and reflect what Kent's suggestion is as it picks out the nodes that really are critical, like the ones that are annotated with NACAM rules and things like that, rather than documenting all the nodes in the module. So I think that would be worth doing. My last comment on here is if you're doing your BIS of this document, have you contacted the original author of this RFC and checked with them if they want to participate in that work or not?
Yeah, we do already send an email to the Andy Berman and exchange an email with them, and I think yeah, we get his feedback, and so we acknowledge his. We actually added him in the acknowledged section about this currently. Get a confirmation from him.
Okay, so he was happy. Yeah. Okay. He's happy for the BIS document. Okay.
Yeah. So as to your first question, what process do you want to follow to update the template?
Initially, I would just like errata filed against the existing RFC to add in the tags, and I can approve that errata, and I think that solves the trust's problem in the immediate term, in the sort of what they need to solve now. So that can be done relatively quickly, although it's taken us 4 months, or me 4 months together. And then the working through the document is then not so urgent from that perspective, and we can try and make sure we get the security templates to the point that we're happy with it, and also the SecADs are happy with this as well because they want to sign
But
off.
you don't, as an AD, you don't see any issues with this document proceeding?
No, other than needing to update that security template text.
Sure. Okay. The second point about Andy, generally when we have a BIS, we offer to make the original author a co-author on the document. So if he says no, certainly that's his right, but I would at least offer
Yes.
that he be a co-author on the document.
Right.
With that said, while Jason's next in queue, while he talks, we're gonna poll adoption, basically same question as the last poll, but for this document. Jason, go ahead, please.
Jason Stern. So for kind of the phase 2, if we split into the security versus the rest, we may want to also incorporate potentially a few things from the versioning work. I can't actually remember if we discussed it in the weekly calls, but for one example is the Yang Semver basically says that all IETF modules shall use a revision label. So that's something we may want to also just a note to the authors that we may want to make a note that there may be a few things from the versioning work we want to roll into that phase 2.
Okay, great, thank you. So I don't think we have a large amount of support, but there's no opposition on adoption of this work. So that's a good indication. We'll talk afterwards, but stay tuned to the list. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I think it was a very successful IETF 117 session. Appreciate everyone being here and presenting your comments and sharing, helping us make this a success.
And stay tuned for an interim on versioning. Thank you all. Special thanks to Jason for helping this session run smoothly.
Yep. Okay. So let me grab Rob. Yeah. I almost feel like maybe we should ask. Or we can do it later this week. Just right now.
Yeah, so let's schedule it.
Yeah.
How about around what is next?
Thursday. First thing first. So
Breakfast isn't perfect for
yeah,
me.
me too.
Thursday, I have. I'm double check.
Well,
It's good. What I'm saying is either before. No, after. Before is better.
yeah, before 12.
Okay.
Do a thing with my family.